Field trips were never my thing. When my class was invited to visit a newly built farm near Bray Road to learn about modern farming, I almost bailed. I didn't care about cows, tractors, or anything else rural. But then, I found out Emma was going. Emma, the girl with golden hair, a laugh like music, and the only reason I was even pretending to care about algebra. That changed everything. The bus ride was long, the kind that makes you feel like you're traveling back in time. The further we went, the fewer signs of civilization we passed. Just fields, patches of dense woods, and long stretches of lonely road. Eventually, we rolled up to the farm. It was a postcard-perfect day. Clear skies and warm sun, the kind of day that makes the countryside seem peaceful. The farmer, his father, and a grizzled old man, introduced as Grandpa Joe, greeted us at the entrance. Grandpa Joe didn't smile. He didn't even speak. He just looked at us like we were an inconvenience. The farm was nice enough. Red barns, grazing animals, and neatly tilled fields. But as the tour began, I noticed something odd. Sharp wire fencing surrounded the entire perimeter. It wasn't the kind you'd expect for keeping livestock in. It looked like it was meant to keep something out. I wandered along with the group, half listening to the farmer talk about crop rotation and feed schedules, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Emma. "Meet me by the horse stables." My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I could already see her standing there when I rounded the corner, gently patting the nose of a chestnut horse. She looked up and smiled. "I thought you'd never show," she teased. I tried to play it cool, but I was terrible at hiding how nervous I was. I wanted to tell her how I felt, how much I liked her, but the words just wouldn't come. She seemed to sense it, and rolled her eyes with a smirk. "Boys," she said, before leaning in and kissing me on the cheek. Before I could even process what had just happened, the horse beside her suddenly reared up, neighing loudly. It was spooked, its eyes wild with fear. "What's wrong with it?" she asked, stepping back. I turned to look and saw something moving at the edge of the woods. At first I thought it was a bear, a big one. But as it moved closer, I realized it wasn't like any bear I'd ever seen. Its fur was patchy, almost mangy, and it walked on all fours but not quite like an animal. Its movements were jerky and unnatural. "What is that?" Emma whispered. The creature moved closer to the fence, and that's when I saw it try to climb over. Its long, clawed arm got caught in the sharp wire, but instead of stopping, it kept pushing through. The wire bit into its skin, and thick, dark blood dripped onto the ground. I heard a strange, guttural noise, part growl, part scream. I bolted. I didn't even think. I just ran to find one of the farmers. I found Grandpa Joe first, standing by the barn. "Something's at the fence," I stammered. It's some kind of animal. I think it's stuck." His expression darkened instantly. Without saying a word, he grabbed a rifle from inside the barn and shouted for the others. "Get the kids to the front. Now," he barked. Emma and I were quickly herded back toward the main entrance with the rest of our classmates. The teachers tried to keep everyone calm, but I could see the panic in their eyes. From where we stood, I could just barely make out Grandpa Joe and the other farmers approaching the fence. Then the gunshots started. The first shot was deafening, echoing across the farm. Then another. And another. The creature let out a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard. A mix of pain and fury that made the hairs on my neck stand up. When it was over, the farmers returned. Grandpa Joe's hands were shaking, and his face was pale. "Sorry, folks," the farmer said to the teachers, his voice strained. "We've got a situation. Gonna have to cut the trip short." "What was that thing?" I asked, but no one answered. As we boarded the bus to leave, I noticed Emma staring out the window, her face pale. She didn't say a word the entire ride back. Neither did I. I still don't know what I saw that day, but every time I think about it, those unnatural movements, the guttural growls, the way it ignored the pain of the wire, I feel a chill run down my spine. Whatever it wasn't just an animal, and I don't think it was the last time that farm would see it.
The rain was light but constant, drumming on the windshield and blurring the world outside. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows along the endless rows of trees on either side. The clock on the dashboard read 2:15 a.m. as we drove down the lonely stretch of highway, deep in the forest, miles away from civilization. It was just me and Joe, doing an overnight haul to make some extra cash. "Man," Joe muttered, looking out his window. "It's creepy out here. No moon, just trees and clouds." I gave a small laugh. "Yeah, thanks for the nightmare fuel, Joe. Keep it up." He chuckled, and for a while, we drove in silence, the road stretching endlessly before us. Joe started dozing off in the passenger seat, his head nodding to the rhythm of the truck. I focused on the road, but a strange, gnawing feeling kept crawling up my spine, an uneasiness that I couldn't shake. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a loud thud above us. Joe jerked awake, his eyes wide. What the hell was that? I hit the brakes, and we skidded a bit on the wet asphalt before coming to a stop. We both sat in silence, straining our ears to catch any other sounds. The rain was all we heard. Maybe a branch, Joe suggested, but his voice was barely a whisper, uncertain. We climbed out of the truck, flashlights in hand, scanning the roof and the surrounding woods. Nothing looked out of place, no branches, no damage, nothing. Just the thick, black forest crowding us on either side, swallowing up our flashlight beams. The clouds had covered up the moon entirely, making the whole scene feel oppressive, like the darkness was pressing down on us. "Well, let's get going. Probably just something falling from a tree," Joe muttered, though he didn't sound convinced. We climbed back into the truck, locking the doors, and I eased us back onto the road. But not even 5 minutes later, Joe gasped and pointed out his window. "Look." There, on the side of the road, something large and shadowy was moving through the trees. It was just barely visible, keeping pace with us in the darkness, gliding between the trunks as if it was nothing. I couldn't make out what it was, but it looked wrong. Big, too big to be a wolf or even a bear. The shape was thick and dark, low to the ground, running on all fours. "Is that a dog?" Joe stammered, but we both knew that was wishful thinking. We watched as it suddenly picked up speed, its form blurring as it lunged closer to the road, matching our pace effortlessly. A chill went down my spine. I gripped the wheel tighter, pressing down on the accelerator, but the thing kept up, and now I could hear it, each step pounding on the wet ground, matching our rhythm. Then a sickening crack filled the air. The creature's body jerked, and it rose up onto two legs, its speed unbroken. I stole a glance in the side mirror, and my stomach twisted as I caught sight of it. An enormous beast, upright, with arms that were way too long, swinging by its sides. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting our brake lights as it stared us down with a hunger I'd never seen before. I floored it, the truck roaring as we picked up speed, but it wasn't enough. I could hear it slamming its fists, or claws, into the side of the truck, like it was trying to knock us off the road. "Get away from us," Joe screamed, his voice cracking. The beast's growls mixed with the sound of rain and rubber burning against wet asphalt. The truck lurched as it struck again, harder this time, almost forcing us into the ditch. I held onto the wheel for dear life, my pulse hammering. and just when I thought it was going to knock us over, headlights appeared up ahead, piercing the darkness. Another vehicle, a sedan, was coming around the curve. The driver, likely as terrified as we were, didn't see the creature until it was too late. The car slammed into it with a sickening crunch, metal against bone. The impact sent the creature spinning off the road, and we screeched to a stop a few yards ahead. I barely remember throwing open my door and stumbling out of the truck, adrenaline and shock pounding in my veins. Joe was right behind me, both of us staring as the creature lay sprawled on the ground. But before I could even process what I was looking at, it moved. It pushed itself up, one leg mangled, but it didn't seem to care. It locked eyes with us for one harrowing second before it slinked back into the woods, dragging its injured leg, vanishing into the darkness as if it had never been there. The sedan's driver, a man probably in his 50s, staggered out of his car, his face pale as death. What was that?" he asked, his voice shaking. We couldn't answer him. We just stared after it, our minds still reeling. We called 911, not sure what story we'd tell, and only that the driver needed help and none of us could face those woods again. When the police arrived, we gave a simple version of events, an animal attack, nothing more. They didn't press us on it, likely chalking it up to a hit and run with a large animal, maybe a bear. Joe and I haven't talked about that night since, not in any real way. But I still have dreams about it, that horrible cracking sound, and the creature's eyes staring back at me, intelligent and hungry, from the dark depths of the forest. And I'll tell you this much, no matter where I drive now, I always make sure I know what's out there. Because sometimes, when the clouds cover the moon just right, I can almost swear I see those eyes again, waiting.
The Beast of Bray Road, told by Danny Walsh. I wasn't sure why we picked that diner. It was a small, unassuming place with a faded sign that read, "Cedar Ridge Eats." We were halfway through Wisconsin on our way to Green Bay, and the chill of fall had crept into the air. The sky was gray, the kind of overcast that makes you feel like the day never properly began. My three friends, Tommy, Greg, and Sarah, were riding with me, cracking jokes and singing loudly to bad 80s pop songs. When Tommy suggested stopping for food, I was skeptical. Isolated diners always felt like a scene from a horror movie waiting to happen. But the place had 5 stars on a local map guide Greg picked up, and Sarah insisted. The moment we walked in, the smell of fresh coffee and homemade pie made me forget my hesitation. A cheerful middle-aged waitress waved us to a booth, and the owner, a man in his 60s, greeted us warmly. There were a few other patrons, mostly locals, judging by the way they greeted each other. It felt safe. As we waited for our food, I noticed newspapers pinned to a bulletin board by the register. Headlines like, "Beast of Bray Road sighted again," and "What lurks in the shadows" caught my eye. Tommy followed my gaze, scoffed, and said loudly, "People will do anything for attention, huh? Some mangy coyote and suddenly it's a monster." Sarah shushed him, embarrassed, but the locals ignored us. I shrugged it off. It was just another local legend, right? Our food came, burgers, fries, and the best apple pie I'd ever tasted. We were laughing about something dumb Greg said when the lights flickered. A moment later, they went out completely, plunging the diner into an uneasy dimness, lit only by the gray light filtering through the windows. "What the hell?" Sarah muttered. The owner grabbed a flashlight and muttered something about checking the breaker box. A young waiter, probably no older than 20, followed him into the back. We sat there, trying to make jokes to lighten the mood, but it didn't feel funny anymore. I glanced out the window. The surrounding forest looked darker than it should have, the tall pines standing like silent sentinels. Minutes passed. Then, we heard hurried footsteps. The young waiter returned alone, his face pale as a sheet. He locked the front door and stammered, "Stay inside. Don't go out there." "What did you see?" the owner demanded, his tone sharp. "Something big." "It was digging through the trash," the waiter whispered. "Not a bear. I don't know what it was, but it looked up at me. Its eyes." The diner went silent except for the sound of someone's fork clattering to their plate. My chest felt tight. One of the older customers, a gruff man in a flannel jacket, snorted. "Kids these days, probably just a raccoon." He stood, walked to the door, and unlatched it despite the waiter's protests. "Wait," Sarah hissed, but he ignored her. The man opened the door a crack, peering out into the cold gray afternoon. That's when we saw it. It moved on all fours at first, slowly padding into view from around the side of the diner. Its fur was matted and dark, wet from what must have been a recent rain. At first glance, I thought it was a bear, but its movements were wrong. Too fluid, too deliberate. And then it looked at us. Its face was wrong. Like a wolf, but distorted. Its snout was too long, its eyes too intelligent, glowing faintly yellow in the dim light. Saliva dripped from its bared teeth as it stood up on its hind legs, towering over the man at the door. The man froze, and for what felt like an eternity, no one moved or breathed. The beast tilted its head, studying him, then shifted its gaze to us inside the diner. "Close the door," someone whispered harshly, but the man was rooted to the spot. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, and the man snapped out of his trance, slamming the door shut and locking it. The beast didn't move, just stood there, staring at us through the glass for what must have been 10 agonizing minutes. I'll never forget those eyes. They weren't the eyes of an animal. They were calculating, almost amused. Finally, the sound of distant sirens broke the tension. The beast turned its head sharply, then dropped to all fours and loped back into the woods, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. When the police arrived, there was nothing to find. The officer took statements, but looked skeptical. I don't blame him. We sounded crazy. To this day, I don't know what we saw, but every time I hear someone laugh off the stories of Bray Road, I remember those eyes. Whatever it was, it's still out there.